It's easy to forget that large-scale building projects are incredibly complicated and can on occasion go terribly wrong. From designs that never made it out of the planning stage to ones that face serious headwinds, it's time to hold on to your hard hats as we take a look at the top 15 failed building projects. Number 15. Ciudad Real Central Airport, Spain. Airports are an important part of a region's ability to connect with the rest of the world, both for trade and passenger transport, and represent a significant investment before they're able to begin operations. You'd think then that planners would be absolutely certain that any new airport already has a huge demand before the workmen even begin to prepare the site, but that's not necessarily always the case. Spain's Ciudad Real Central Airport was meant to completely change the fortunes of the area, just to the south of the municipality of Ciudad Real, and with a cost of 1.1 billion euros, which is about the equivalent to 1.3 billion US dollars, it was ready to open in 2009, with one of the longest runways in Europe. Its design ensured it would be able to welcome the largest passenger and cargo planes, with terminals that could handle 2 million people and 47,000 tons of goods per year. The only problem was that very few airlines actually wanted to use it. There were a number of factors that led to this problem, such as its complicated construction near a protected wildlife zone that delayed its completion by 4 years, and an upgrade at the main airport of Madrid that significantly increased its capacity and was far more appealing to carriers. Connections with the surrounding area, such as a planned high-speed rail line, also failed to materialize, and this all led to the operating company entering receivership within just 3 years. The airport closed in 2012 and only reopened again in 2019, although as a private airfield and with nowhere near the usage that it was originally intended to cater to. Number 14. The Superconducting Super Collider, Texas. The Large Hadron Collider near Geneva in Switzerland is famed for being the largest machine and installation ever built by mankind, and generated such power that it was able to unlock a mystery of physics that had puzzled researchers for decades. But it was far from the only super collider that had been planned, and if things went differently, the accolades could have been achieved by a facility in Texas. Known as the Superconducting Super Collider, or the Desertron, the budget had been fully approved by Congress to construct a circular tunnel with a circumference of 54 miles, and work had already begun. In the late 1980s and early 90s, 17 access shafts had been dug, and 14.6 miles of tunnels had been already bored. But in 1993, funding was canceled in favor of other projects. Astonishingly, by the time this happened, $2 billion had already been spent on the collider, and all of this work was ultimately a complete waste, because there was no alternative use for what had already been created. In the following years, there was a number of attempts to sell the property, something that was spurred on by how often illegal parties and criminal activities took place in the buildings and the tunnels, but it would be 20 years until a buyer was found, and it was sold for a fraction of the price it cost to build. Now the site is owned by a chemical manufacturer which produces oil field products, and simply uses the vast tunnel networks to store sensitive materials. Number 13. Ryugyong Hotel, North Korea. North Korea isn't exactly a country that's known for spending its finances wisely, and in the center of Pyongyang, there's a huge reminder of that for all to see: the Ryugyong Hotel. At 1,080 feet or 330 meters tall, it's by far the tallest structure in the city and in the country, but it also holds the world record for being the tallest structure on Earth that remains unoccupied, and there's no sign of this changing anytime soon. Work began on the hotel in 1987, but following the collapse of the Soviet Union, North Korea was facing an economic crisis, and funding for the project dried up. Despite reaching the planned height, no interior work had been carried out, nor had a single window been fitted into place, and this is how it remained for the next 16 years. Work began once more in 2008, with plans that it would be complete within 4 years to form part of the celebrations in 2012 of the centenary of Kim Il-sung's birth. In the end, however, even though the exterior was completed, barely any furnishings have been placed inside. Despite spending several $1 billion on the hotel, it's still unfit for use, and the only thing now it's used for is broadcasting propaganda material after a huge LED screen was installed on one of its sides. Number 12. Thedara Hotel and Spa, Las Vegas. With so many huge and impressive structures along the Strip, it takes a truly unique design for anything to stand out in Las Vegas. And this has pushed the developers to be more creative than ever before. This doesn't always work out for the best, however, as was the case with the Thedara Hotel and Spa, which opened in 2009. Described as a 1.6 million square foot or 150,000 square meter hotel and spa, it was a collaborative effort between MGM Resorts International and Infinity World Development. Offering 1,495 suites across 57 floors, a huge spa and pool and deck area, it's just one of two venues within the city center area that doesn't have any floor space dedicated to gambling. This wasn't the only unusual thing about it, however. Architects had chosen a concave design for the building and used a huge amount of glass to give it a modern feel. But they failed to take one thing into account: the scorching Nevada sun. It soon became clear that the structure began acting as a collecting mirror, which reflected and concentrated the heat from the sun and created dangerously high temperatures around the pool area. In the end, at vast expense, all of the windows had to be covered with a non-reflective coating, and large blue umbrellas were placed across the entire pool deck to provide respite from the heat. It's not a complete fix, though. If you ever visit the pool of the hotel, you'll soon start noticing how much warmer it is there than anywhere else. Number 11. London's Garden Bridge. City planners have to strike a careful balance between designing structures that are practical, while at the same time improving the living conditions of nearby residents. And while the team behind the Garden Bridge in London initially thought that they had come up with something that would be treasured by generations to come, they were wildly off the mark. The idea was to build a new pedestrian bridge across the River Thames between Waterloo and Blackfriars Bridge, and that no vehicles or even bicycles would be allowed on it. Planned to be covered in trees and gardens, events would have been regularly held on it, and there would have been a commercial building on one end that was intended to raise the funds needed for its ongoing maintenance. Londoners, however, didn't see any need for the bridge, and while it was originally supported by several high-profile figures, it soon became clear that not only was there no appetite for it, but that large groups of people were actively against the plans. Add this to the escalating projected costs of the project, and it was canceled a few years after being announced. Amazingly, though, by that time, the organizers had already spent around $60 million of public money on the bridge, all of which went to waste. Number 10. Rana Plaza, Bangladesh. Rana Plaza was a huge 8-story building in the Dhaka district of Bangladesh that was at the center of the region's manufacturing industry, providing workspace for several shops, a bank, and a number of garment facilities that made products for brands like Benetton, Prada, Gucci, Primark, and Walmart. There were around 5,000 employees on site at any one time. There was a problem, though. The building had originally been planned to be used for shops and offices, and the designers hadn't taken into account the weight of the industrial machinery that was installed, which led to severe structural issues. In April of 2013, television cameras from the local news station found evidence of large cracks that were forming on the roof, and the building was immediately evacuated. The owner, however, told everyone that it was safe to return, and some of the companies refused to pay employees who left work that day. So everyone went back in and the machines were started up again. The following morning, there was a power failure, and diesel generators on the top floor were switched on, something that caused everyone's worst fears to come true. The whole building collapsed, leaving only the lowest floor intact, looking almost as if an earthquake had struck. At least 1,134 people are known to have died in the incident, and a further 2,500 being injured, and it's widely regarded as the deadliest structural failure in modern history. Number 9. The Vivekananda Road Flyover, Kolkata, India. There are a number of different ways that bridges can be made, and developers have to take into account the specific geography of what's being constructed to determine the most suitable option. In most cases, once a bridge is complete, it takes highly unusual conditions to cause any severe problems. But because bridge structures are designed in the way that spreads the overall load throughout, they're arguably at their most dangerous just before the entire superstructure has been put into place. This was seen to a tragic extent in Kolkata, India in 2016 during the construction of the Vivekananda Road Flyover. Work had begun on the 1.4-mile or 2.2-kilometer long bridge in 2009, and it was nearing completion. Concrete had just been laid, but the following day workers heard a cracking noise coming from the cantilever, and the next thing they knew, a 490-foot or 150-meter-long steel segment had collapsed, killing 27 people and injuring 50 others. In the investigation that followed, it was discovered that not only had the company responsible for building the bridge decided to use substandard materials to save on costs, but they also failed to take adequate precautions to ensure the structure was suitably held in place before all of the support elements had been installed. The construction company was charged with murder, and hopefully lessons were learned that'll ensure nothing like this ever happens again. Number 8. The Lotus Riverside Complex, China. No matter where you go in China, the chances are that you won't be far away from a large-scale construction project. Such is the rate of the expansion currently taking place in that country. With more and more citizens wanting to move to urban areas for opportunities, residential blocks are being built at an astonishing rate. But this speed sometimes means basic safety measures are being overlooked. The most surprising example of this took place in Shanghai in 2009 at a development that had, by all accounts, been finished. The Lotus Riverside Complex was made up of 11 buildings, each virtually identical, with 629 apartments across 13 floors. Built next to a river, partly because of the view, but also because that was one of the only places where there was space to construct such a large development, planners seemingly forgot to fully inspect the quality of the foundations that would be built. Having underestimated the depth of soft ground and the effect of rising water levels, the steel foundations of the buildings were nowhere near deep enough. One morning in June of 2009 gave way. One of the buildings simply toppled over and remained fully intact except for the fact that it was lying on its side. With most of the apartments having been sold and residents already living in them, it seems lucky that only one person, a construction worker, died in the incident. Number 7. Cincinnati Subway, Ohio. Subway systems transformed the development of cities by providing a quick way to travel between districts without needing to build space-consuming infrastructure on ground level. It does, however, cost a huge amount of money to safely bore tunnels beneath a thriving metropolis, which is why you don't see them in every city around the world. What's surprising, though, is that there are some places where virtually an entire tunnel system was built to provide a subway network that was never completed. The largest of all the abandoned tunnel networks in the United States can be found beneath the streets of Cincinnati, Ohio, where during the 1920s more than 2 miles were excavated as an upgrade to the city's streetcar system. The Great Depression later in that decade meant the funds soon dried up, and the project was indefinitely canceled, meaning the tunnels and the 7 stations were simply left to gather dust. Costing around $13 million at the time, which is the equivalent to around $200 million today, there was a number of attempts in the following decades to revive the plans. Due to lack of investment and other projects that were deemed more important, nothing ever happened. Today, parts of the tunnel have been repurposed as a route for a water main, and the rest of the system is used by homeless people and urban explorers, and are generally regarded to be in fairly good shape. Recent estimates suggested that it would cost $2.6 million to simply maintain them in this state, $19 million to fill them with gravel, and just over $100 million to make the network suitable for use by a modern subway. So far, the decision has been to leave them as they are. Number 6. Hyatt Regency Walkway, Kansas City. To attract the highest prices and to stand out amongst the competition, hotel designs have become increasingly elaborate. But this isn't a new phenomenon. In the late 1970s, the 40-story Hyatt Regency Kansas City was billed as the most luxurious place in the city, despite numerous setbacks in its design and construction. Featuring a huge lobby that had a multi-story atrium with steel and glass and concrete walkways that were suspended from the ceiling, it's certainly unlike anything else anyone had seen at the time. But it turned out that the design pushed way past the limit of what was safe. Each of the walkways was 120 feet or 37 meters long and weighed around 64,000 pounds or 29,000 kilograms without anyone on them. And for some reason, the 4th level walkway was positioned directly above the 2nd level one. This proved to be a catastrophic error in July of 1981, when with 1,600 people gathered around the ground level of the atrium for a tea dance, people on the 4th floor walkway heard a series of popping noises. The platform dropped a couple of inches at first, then completely collapsed, taking the 2nd level one with it in the process. An event that led to the loss of 114 lives and injuring a further 216. It wasn't just the poor design, but the inadequate emergency response procedures that led to the high death toll. And the example of this event, which remains the most deadly non-deliberate structural failure in U.S. history, is still taught to design students to this day as an example of how things can go wrong. Number 5. The World, Dubai. Backed by huge funds thanks to its rich deposits of oil, the United Arab Emirates have turned Dubai into one of the world's leading cities, with a range of creative and inspirational projects that most other cities could only dream of. Not everything that's undertaken proves to be a success, though, and while the world is an archipelago of small artificial islands a short distance off the coast in the Persian Gulf, it seemed like a good futuristic idea when it was announced in 2003. It's since proven to be a commercial disaster. Made up of 300 individual islands, problems with the project first began in 2008 with the financial crisis. Although a reported 60% of the islands had been sold by that time, very few of the owners still had enough to actually develop anything on the land that they had bought, and still to this day only a handful of the islands have any structures at all. Believed to have cost at least $15 billion to build, it's probably a good thing there aren't lots of people living there now, because the world has recently begun to experience a series of structural problems. Mistakes made in the creation of the foundations and tethering the islands to the seabed means that some are now beginning to drift and sink, and it's questionable whether any of them will even survive the decade. Number 4. Kangbashi District, China. With such rapid urban expansion across China, the government decided to build several complete districts that were ready for people and businesses to move into. While this has worked in some places, there's one that so far has been a complete failure, and despite having an estimated capacity of 1 million people, it's rarely seen more than 20 or 30,000 living there at any one time. Known as the Kangbashi District, it's part of the district of Ordos in Inner Mongolia. Built at a reported cost of $161 billion, and with an impressive capacity for all the services you need in a place like this, on paper it should have been a success, and that's arguably what became the problem. Most of the apartments were bought by investors who had no actual intention of ever living there, and were hoping to rent them out to tenants. But with such a large housing supply on offer, very few people were willing to pay the prices that would have made the investment worthwhile. With the failure to develop a thriving community, property prices began to plummet, and now the owners have very little choice but to hold on to their investments and hope things turn around. Often classed as a ghost city because it's so empty, there is still hope that the Kangbashi District will one day become a bustling metropolis. For now, though, it's a complete failure, and that future seems a long way off. Number 3. Sampoong Department Store, South Korea. The story of the Sampoong department store is another example of a structure that was built with one purpose in mind, but a later change of use led to disastrous consequences. Located in the Seoul district of Seoul in South Korea, work began on what was a former landfill site in 1987. It was originally designed to be a 4-story residential building, but partway through the construction phase, the owner of the company decided to add a 5th floor and incorporate a large department store that, due to the requirements for floor space, involved removing a number of support columns so escalators could be put in instead. The construction company refused to make these changes because of safety fears, so were fired, and a new company with little understanding of the designs was brought in to finish the work. It was finally completed in 1990 and opened to the public in July of that year, and it was a commercial success, with an estimated 40,000 people visiting each day. As well as the design changes, a number of mistakes were made, such as the installation of 3 15-ton air conditioning units on the roof, which weighed 4 times what the original designs had accounted for, and it wasn't long until all of the errors resulted in a disaster. In 1995, cracks began to form in the 5th floor ceiling, which the management ignored, and on June 29th that year, the entire building collapsed, causing 502 people to lose their lives, and 937 to be seriously injured. Number 2. The Kemper Arena. The 19,500-seater Kemper Arena opened in Kansas City, Missouri in 1974 and would for a time become a successful local venue, thanks in part to its revolutionary design that didn't have any interior columns that blocked the view of guests. Despite this, it became known for several unfortunate events that took place there, and as a result it underwent a conversion in 2019 and is now instead a youth sports facility. In 1979, just 5 years after opening, a powerful storm ripped through the city. Because of the way the arena's roof had been designed, water began to pool on it, and a 1-acre section collapsed, blowing out several walls as it did so. This was soon repaired, however, and the arena would go on to host a number of high-profile events over the following years, including a fateful WWF show where legendary performer Owen Hart would lose his life following a stunt that went wrong. With its unfortunate association with this tragedy, the arena, which had been expected to be a premier destination for decades to come, mainly became used as a venue for the American Royal Livestock Show. And once this became unprofitable too, new owners were sought to repurpose it entirely. Number 1. Basilica de la Sagrada Familia. Modern skyscrapers can be built surprisingly quickly, sometimes within just a few years. But the more complicated the building, the longer it'll take. And in the case of the Basilica de la Sagrada Familia in Barcelona, Spain, it's taken more than 140 years and still isn't finished. Envisaged by Spanish architect Antoni Gaudí with Gothic and Art Nouveau inspiration, construction of the Roman Catholic minor basilica began in 1882, purely with privately donated funds. By the time Gaudí died in 1926, it was only a quarter complete, and because of delays caused by the Spanish Civil War, things only reached a halfway point in 2010. Seen as one of the most controversial buildings in Spain, and with only limited records remaining of the original designs, the basilica is still technically under construction, and even though the process has substantially increased in recent years, it's probably still a few decades away from completion in a best-case scenario. While it doesn't quite count as a total failure yet, it certainly will have a lot to live up to if it's ever fully finished. Watch our binge-watching playlist if you'd like to watch all of our most popular top 15 videos. Grab a drink, grab a snack, and get ready to binge.